So with dependency theory and world system theory are interrelated. There are terminologies that could be found on both. So the core countries, the peripheral or periphery countries, and semi, or let's interchange semi-peripheral and the peripheral countries. These are interrelated countries. That's why it's called system, world system. It also explains here in this in both theories why those poor countries have difficulty developing. There are reasons why. We will discuss it further with the aid of video clip instead nung sa module. Let's have dependency theory. I will pause in between if there is something that I need to elaborate.
Hi, my name is Alan Sens, and I'm standing outside the Liu Institute for Global Issues at the University of British Columbia. Welcome to the Global Politics Instructional Video Series. In this series, we're exploring a number of key concepts in the study of international relations and global politics. Today, we are looking at dependency theory. Now, dependency theory emerged in the 1960s and 1970s out of Central and South America. But it was part of a larger movement that was asking a lot of questions about international relations at the time. And one of those questions was, why are so many countries in the world not developing? Now, the traditional answer to the question was, well, that's because these countries are not pursuing the right economic policies, or their governments are authoritarian and corrupt. But dependency theorists wanted to know if that was all there was to it. And they began to argue that, in fact, countries weren't developing around the world because the international system was actually preventing them from doing so. That, in fact, this international system was exploitative. It was characterized by the dominance of some countries over others.
Yeah. So why, a big question, why there are underdeveloped countries in relation nga dun sa modernization is because there are several factors. So isa lang tong dependency and world system theory. But apart from that, yung system, yung strategy na ginagamit mismo ng administration and the leadership, the manner of leadership ng country. Diba? Yun nga, na-mention it's corruption or masyado authoritarian or umabot na siguro sa tyranny na wala naman na sigurong tyrant ngayon, di ba? Siguro way back meron, pero more on yung na-discuss natin in modernization now, it's the why society are failing to modernize is because it's either yung people ayaw tanggapin yung modernization or yung leadership ng country or ng society ay corrupt. So instead na makapag-benefit yung karamihan sa wealth and funds for the people it themselves, hindi yun na-acquire, hindi yun na-ibibigay because in the middle or in the top, if not or somewhere bago makarating sa baba, sa mga tao mismo, may nagaganap ng corruption. So isang factor yun. Ito naman, so dependency theory, it focuses na mayroong dominance, may effect yung mga malalaking country towards sa smaller countries. Kaya yung mga malalaking country, yung mga rich country, lalo silang lumayaman, yung mga small countries, lalo silang naghihirap. Okay, continuing.
So what I thought we'd do today is look a little bit more at dependency theory and their argument. Let's begin. Okay, dependency theory. Now, there's many different ways of describing dependency theory, and what I'm going to describe to you today is actually more of an assembly of different theories, including world system theory, historical structural theory, neo-Marxist theory. There are components of all of those theories in dependency theory. Now, dependency theorists, first of all, argue that there are a number of different kinds of states in the world, and each of them forms a different function or performs a different function in the world economy. First of all, there are states that are at the center of the center, and these are the richest, most powerful countries, the United States, United Kingdom, France, and so on.
Or i-crossover na rin natin. Although mamaya may feature din tayo na short clip about world system. Yan, yung center of the center, or the core. Diba? Sa Earth, yung core, sila yung nasa center ng capitalism. They are the richest countries. All right? Take note of that.
Then there are countries that are on the periphery of the center. These are modern, industrialized, wealthy countries like Canada, for example, or the Netherlands and perhaps Japan. And these countries have a little less global power than the center countries do, but are nevertheless still quite rich. Then you have countries that are at the center of the periphery. These are countries that are still
So yung isa, periphery of the center, pareho silang periphery. Diba? Kaya it's just that yung isa, yung nauna, yung periphery of the center, parang mas sila, example nga is Canada. They are living independently, maganda ang benefits ng mga tao na nakukuha sa society and sa economy ng Canada. Still, when it comes to cost of living, same with United States, mataas ang cost of living, same with Canada and the same countries na nasa periphery center.
Developing, but they have a fair amount of wealth, countries like South Africa or India or Brazil, for example. Then you have countries that are on the periphery of the periphery, and these are the poorest countries, the Cambodias, the Zambias, the El Salvadors.
All right. So yung center of the periphery, sila? Ito yung mga countries na rich in, di ba sabi, rich in some way kasi example nga, Brazil, South Africa, the South Africa sa hindi yung Africa mismo. Magkaiba yon. Magkaiba sila ng state ng status. And yung isang na-mention, in these countries, sila kasi yung malalawak ang resources. Ang dami nilang natural resources na kapag ibinenta nila, kumbaga sila lang yung may ganon. Maraming kumukuha ng ganon. Marami ang kumukuha sa kanilang ibang country nung resources na yun. Kaya, considered sila as the main source. Pag main source of that product. Kaya, halimbawa sa Brazil, yung coffee. Ang Starbucks, yung isa sa mga pinakamahal nilang coffee. Sa Brazil, I think it's the Komodo Dragon. Sa Brazil yata. I think, if I'm not mistaken. So, syempre, mga grains, mga premium grade na grains. Alright? Although dito sa atin, sa Philippines, yung Starbucks yata dito, for what I know, or other coffee shops, ang kinukuhanan nilang mga premium grades na mga coffee beans is yung nasa Baguio. Kasi as we all know, Baguio has well-nourished at mga matatabang lupa. Diba? Doon nga ang vegetable capital of the world, of the Philippines. Diba? Kasi halos lahat ng vegetables na umiikot sa Luzon, doon galing. Kaya pag nababa dito sa pag nagbabagyo, diba? Usually may mga daladalang yung mga service na ay mga sasakyan na daladala is somehow kaya mag-preserve ng vegetables. And anyway, Moving forward, then there is the periphery of the periphery, yung mga nasa gilid na. I mean, sila na yung poorest of the poor. So one indicator na I can relate, na I can share, kapag pag mahirap ang country, hindi mataas ang cost of living. Kapag halimbawa tayo, mga Pilipino, pumunta tayo either dito kay Cambodia, kay Zambia, tsaka kay El Salvador, kaya natin makasurvive kasi nasanay tayo sa hirap, pero mas mahirap pa yung buhay nila. Parang ganun. Alam naman natin, pagka mataas ang cost of living, parang sa Singapore, diba? Mataas ang cost of living doon. Yung tipong dito sa Pilipinas, yung bottled water, 50 pesos. Mineral na yun ha. Sabihin natin, Wilkins. 60, 70, pinakamahal na yung 100. Sa kanila, ang isang bottled water na, you know, if not one, nasa 1,000 kasi, necessity yun, kulang sa kanila yun. Inaangkat nila yun. So mataas, and everything else there is mahal. Something parang ganoon. All right?
And what dependency theorists argue is that there is an international division of labor.
May kanya-kanyang contribution. Di ba pag may division of labor, meron ito nakatoka sa'yo. Ito kay country na to nakatoka sa kanya. Di ba may ganon? Kaya tinatawag na dependency. Na this country, halimbawa si Netherlands, provider siya ng mga organic milk. Pero nung way back, siguro up to now, nasa kanila ang ganyang status. Tsaka yung mga farms sila doon is well kept at tsaka well maintained, alagang-alaga. Kaya pag sinabing farmer ka sa Netherlands or in the Americas, mayaman ka. Samantalang sa Philippines, pag sinabing farmer, di ba, nalulugi pa. Kumbaga kita na nila doon sa aanihin, yung kikitain nila, ibabayad na lang nila sa utang. Kaya yung 10 buwan nilang inantay na harvest, ang nauwi na lang nila sa dami ng utang, minsan, swerte na meron kang 2,000. This is just based dun sa dun sa interview namin sa isang research ha. Parang, ito yung puhunan, parang alam mo ang laki. Parang nasa 100,000 or 2 or nasa 3, parang ganon or something like that. 100,000 na, ganyan. Pero at the end, after nung ilang buwan na yon, ang mauwi na lang nung nagtrabaho, nung laborer ay kaltas na lahat ng utang. So, yun. Kaya isa yun sa explanation kung bakit may local version na bakit yung mga mayayaman, yung mga may hirap, lalong mahirap. Anyway, moving forward.
Between all of these countries. And their argument is that the core countries, the center of the center countries, dominate in terms of industry, in terms of technology. They're the countries that have all of the research, technology, and capital-intensive industries. Meanwhile, countries in the periphery, especially, pretty much are characterized by resource extraction economies, agricultural production, and providing cheap labor. And as a result, the structure of the world economy is one in which the periphery of the center countries serve the economic interests of the richest countries. The countries on the center of the periphery serve the interests of both the core countries and the periphery of the center countries. And naturally, the countries on the periphery of the periphery, they serve the economic interests of everybody else. So it's sort of an all roads lead to Rome kind of situation in the international economy. The periphery countries all serve the interests of the more wealthy countries.
True enough, nangyayari yan, di ba? Parang yung mga riches, they get something from na mas makaka-benefit sa kanila dun sa mga nakasurrounding sa kanilang countries. Siguro yung ibibigay, magkikita sila, yung ibibigay nila sa smaller countries, sa periphery, sa center of periphery, sa periphery of the center, and sa poorest of the poor, is nakinita na nila. Ay mas malaki ang kikitain nila. Kapitalista nga sila eh. Mas malaki pa rin yung bawi nila kaysa dun sa ibinibigay nila. Samantalang, yung tatlo, siguro si center, si periphery of the center, si medyo maunlad na country, ang resources na maibibigay niya is 20% ng kaya niyang harvestin. Halimbawa, usapang grains halimbawa. Kaya niya harvest, kaya nila yung 20% na kaya niyang harvestin, kaya niya i-provide. Yung 20% na yon, ang halaga ang quantity no, halimbawa 20,000 sacks. Dahil si malaking countries, halimbawa si Canada, halimbawa lang naman, no? Nakakapag-produce siya ng 100,000. So kaya niya, yung matitirang 80, yun ang ipang-circulate niya doon sa sarili niyang country. Pero nakapagbigay pa rin siya at kumita pa rin siya. Nakapag-interchange pa rin sila ng parang barter, parang ganon, ni central country at ni peripheral country. May exchange pa din. So same goes, so si center of the periphery, parang, sige, tingin ko kaya ko mag-provide ng 40% of what I earn. Kasi siguro, mas malaki yung maibibigay sa kanya maibibigay sa kanya ni core country. Sige, halimbawa, bigyan mo ako 40%, ito naman ang i-donate ko sa'yo. Pero yung dinonate ni core country, kay periphery at saka kay center periphery, lang yon, wala pa siguro combined 10% lang nung kinikita nung core country. So sila pa rin yung pinakamalaki. Halimbawa, yun, 40%. Halimbawa, nakapagbigay in exchange, magbibigay naman kami ng ganito karami, 30. Sige, 40 kayo, we will exchange it with 100,000 cost of equipment. Parang ganon. Yung equipment na yon, perhaps is just a small portion of what the big country really has. Diba? Halimbawa, kung sa Pilipinas yan, kung Japan, halimbawa si Japan ay core country, ang ibinabagsak dito sa atin, yung mga surplus nila, na magaganda pa naman. Ganon. And then, mas lalo naman syempre kay poor country. Na 100% ang dependency nila, yung ibibigay na kapalit. Halimbawa, mag-harvest sila. Halimbawa, let's just say, coffee beans. Mag-harvest sila. Ang ibibigay nila, 60% of their harvest in exchange of, halimbawa, sige, technology din. No, galing doon sa core country. Or halimbawa, kailangan literacy, libro naman. Or computers na papadala sa mga public schools nitong poor country. Yung mga pinaglumaan ng ibang country, nung main country, nung core country na yun ang mapupunta kay periphery of the periphery, yung pinaka-poor. Pero yung natira sa kanila, na harvest nila, ilang percent lang, 40. Kaya lalo silang naghihirap instead na, diba? Instead na, lahat ng countries na yan, lahat ng si semi-periphery, tsaka si center of the periphery, si PC, si CP, tsaka si PP. Halimbawa, nakakapag-produce sila ng around 80,000 to 100,000 sacks of crops. Halimbawa, si periphery of the periphery, si poorest of the poor, ang binibigay niya yung halos more than half of nung kita, nung kanyang product, kasi nga, mas, dahil ang binibigyan niya, hindi lang naman si Central, pati yung nado sa kabila, at saka itong kabila. Yun ang explanation. Going back, continuing, meron pa siyang ibang i-explain kasi.
The second argument that dependency theorists make is that there is a class distinction. And what they mean by that is that in each of these different type of countries around the world, there is a clear divide between the rich and the poor. So I'm going to draw a small rich class and then the larger working class, or the poor, the masses, if you like. And this is the same in each of the different types of countries that exist around the world. And what dependency theorists argue is that these rich people, the political and economic elites of the countries around the world, all cooperate with one another. And they cooperate with one another to ensure that they stay in power and that they increase their own wealth. So they collaborate with one another to maintain this system, to keep the system the way it is.
Yan. Sige, let's go historical, no? Yung mga richest people, diba? If you would look back in history, na yung mga mayaman, ikinakasal sila sa kapwa nilang mayayaman dati. Diba? O kaya minsan nga, kinakasal sila, sa may ibang mga countries, ikinakasal sila sa mga kamag-anak din nila to maintain, hindi lang yung bloodline, but also hindi makawala yung yaman. Or if yan ay maging intercontinental, global, magiging global, yung si country na nasa CC, nasa, core country, hahanap siya ng isang mayamang angkan na nasa PC. Yun ang pakakasalan niya. O, business-wise, halimbawa, si Apple, California, main office, the central office is in California. I think California, oo. Yun yung mga iPhones niyo, California. Anyway, hahanap siya ng partner na nasa, halimbawa, nasa Canada. Yan. If you want to establish an Apple office there. Ang hahanapin niya doon, yung mga credible partners. Mga business people din na mayaman na pwede nila maka-tie up at pwedeng if not ma-franchise yung business, is yun nga, partner nila, business partner nila. Paano makapag-branch out sila? Mas lalawak ngayon si Apple. Same goes with KCP. Yung halimbawa nasa bandang, let's consider sa Asia. Nasa Asia, sige, consider natin si Hong Kong na CP, di ba? Gusto nilang magkaroon ng branch din doon. So maghahanap sila ng business owner na nasa Hong Kong base na maraming chains of businesses din na same with their technology, and yun ang magiging kapartner nila. And then same goes with the PP siguro. Isang mayaman na nandoon sa lugar. Kumbaga, yung mga mayayaman na nandoon sa poorest of the poor, yayaman sila lahat. Kaya mayroong class distinction, may rich and may poor in all parts of this categorization. All right, so third.
The third argument made by dependency theorists is that all of these structures, the international division of labor, the class distinctions in all the countries of the world, all exist within a wider global system. And this wider global system is characterized by global capitalism. And what that means is that in this system, liberal economic theory dominates. Theories of trade, theories of finance, which of course all serve the interests of the core countries. In addition, multinational corporations and banks in this system are instruments of rich peoples in the core countries. International institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, again, all serve the interests of the richest countries and the richest peoples of the world. Even things like education systems and the global media also are structures that serve the interests of the most powerful countries and the richest people in the world. And so as a result, this entire system, the international division of labor, the class distinctions, and global capitalism, all serve the interests of the wealthy. They don't serve the interests of developing countries. They do not promote development or equal opportunity. Instead, this system promotes dominance and exploitation. And so from a dependency theory perspective, how can states possibly develop in this kind of a system? The system is actually designed to prevent them from developing. And dependency theorists call this underdevelopment. And so, as a result, the system promotes underdevelopment of countries around the world. And this is why we are not seeing countries develop in the way that traditional economic theory describes.
Yeah. So, again, this is just a theory. So, like I said, may iba pa ring factors why countries remain to be poor. Other countries around the world remain to be poor. Like halimbawa, the corruption, idagdag pa natin yung proliferation ng drugs. Isa yan sa mga dahilan kung bakit at still ang source naman din ng mga ng drug paraphernalia in most of the countries galing din naman sa mga mayayaman. May nag-finance dyan. So itong mga financer na to, still they benefit, they are the richest. They are the richest in the pyramid or in the cycle, in the system. Yeah, so the dependency theory it's a theoretical framework or a system that says na yung mga mayaman, kilala silang yung mayaman kasi kumbaga, they get dependency. What they give out is still a little portion of what they already have. And apart dun sa mga kinukuha na nila na malaki pa rin yung portion na ibinibigay para masustain yung pangailangan ng isang big country. Alright, so that is dependency theory. Now we move kay Wallerstein world system. Yeah. So like dependency theory, si world system ni Immanuel Wallerstein suggests that wealthy countries benefit from other countries and exploit their countries' citizens. Ito naman more on the exploitation, hindi naman pang-abuso, kaya lang mayroong inequality sa treatment. Kaya, yun, sinasabing exploit, may inequality na nangyayari. Alright? Within the citizens and the citizens of the rich countries or wealthy countries. Okay. Yeah. So just like dependency theory, so merong si dependency theory, center of the center, center of the periphery, periphery of the center, and the periphery of the periphery. Tayo, ito naman, core. Ito yung riches. Sila yung parang center of the center. Right? Semi-periphery, medyo middle, in between. And then yung mga peripheral, ito yung mga nasa outside. Sila yung mga mahihirap. So to explain further, so example ng core center, dito kinonsider na niya si Japan na center, core country. No. Ito yung mga countries na, like I've mentioned, ang taas ng cost of living. Kapag ikaw ay, ikaw ay foreign doon and then you plan to work there or magbabakasyon ka lang, makikita mo na ang taas ng cost of living as compared sa mga pag nanirahan ka sa Pilipinas. And ang benefit mo naman dito, pagka dito ka nagtrabaho, yung ipapadala mo sa Pilipinas is, padala ka na $1,000, convert mo yan, nasa 50K yun a month. That's very, maganda na ang, kumbaga, sabihin natin mo, $100, meron na silang tama ba? $2,000, halimbawa, meron na silang, sufficient, meron silang 100,000 a month na sa Philippines. Malaking kita na yon sa isang household. O halimbawa, nanay mo lang, di ba? Luxurious na ang pamumuhay niyo noon. Nasa Amerika. Kaya noong araw, marami talagang gustong tinatawag na American Dream. If not, yung mga, pagkahalimbawa, medyo mahirap sila pumunta sa Germany tsaka sa Japan, although magandang country din yan, because of the language. May language barrier. So, kailangan mo pang mag-aral ng Nihongo at saka ng German language. To communicate. Although, yung mga countries na yan, sila ay mga developers at manufacturers ng mga industrial material or industrial tools, industrial vehicle. If not, pati mismo mga motor. Alright? So their characteristic, high level of industrialization kasi they provide sa global market, they provide halimbawa sa Germany, yung mga sasakyan nila doon. Sa Japan, Toyota, Suzuki, Mitsubishi, Honda. Tama ba? Japan ba ang Honda? Hyundai pala yung Korea. Yun. Diba? Yung mga German cars. Isa rin sa mga pinakamamahal na kotse sa buong mundo. Diba? Yeah, urbanization, the capital intensive, capital intensive, have high wages and high technological production. They can produce, because of their technology, kaya nilang mag-manufacture ng marami. They are the manufacturers. Core countries exploit both semi-peripheral and peripheral countries. Merong inequality. Later, malalaman natin ano yung exploitation na peripheral countries, mostly ito yung mga African nation. Low income. Some parts in South America, like Colombia, Venezuela, yan. Yung mga Latin Americas, mga Latin people. Kaya nga sila yung kaya mayroong mga people of color na pumupunta sa Amerika. It's because that's what they provide, labor. Latino, Latinas, mga black people. 'Di ba? Nung araw, ang provision nila sa mga big countries like the United States, sila yung laborers, sila yung slaves. Worst pa nga sila yung slaves. And up to now, meron pa rin yung colorism, meron pa rin yung white supremacy. Kaya hindi sila makapayag na pag may black na nagdo-dominate, nagagalit sila. Kaya meron pa rin racism towards them. And affected ang mga Pilipino na nandoon kasi nga brown color tayo and we are of Spanish race, di ba? Galing tayo meron tayong influence ng mga Spanyol, di ba? Kaya, nagiging part tayo ng discrimination of color. Yan. They are usually less industrialized. They usually have low literacy rates and lack consistent internet access. So, hindi pa naman siguro tayo kasama dito. Perhaps sa semi-periphery, peripheral, kasama tayo doon. Kasi tayo ay nasa average level naman ng literacy. Diba? Ang problema lang talaga sa atin, unemployment. Kasi ang daming the problem is, ang daming graduate, hindi naman makahanap ng trabaho. Yan. So, yes, kasama pa rin tayo din sa inconsistent na internet. Meron naman, nasusustain naman na siya unti-unti, but not as fast as the internet of these core countries. Labor and materials, sources. All right? Yan. So there are the in-between countries. Siguro kasama na tayo dito. Less developed. We're still developing, pero mabagal, pero hindi naman tayo yung poorest of the poor. Kasi di ba naman, as compared dun sa mga African children, merong sa Africa na talagang walang makain, may starvation, may malnourishment, dahil wala talaga silang makain. Yung mga bata. I don't know if you've seen YouTube videos there, pero meron doon, meron silang tinatawag na mud cookies. Sobrang wala silang makain. Kumukuha sila ng lupa, tapos yun yung binibake nila, tapos yun yung kinakain nila. Hindi pa naman tayo umabot sa ganung point. Kasi nga, di ba, malang bilihin, yes, pero we still manage to have food on our table kahit papano. Di ba? Nagkakaroon, we still eat 3 times a day, or 2, or napanood na daw ni Jopek yun. Di ba? Bumili sila kumakain sila ng mud cookies. Tayo, we're very much luckier. Kahit hindi tayo yung mayamang-mayaman, hindi pa tayo umaabot sa ganung punto. Marami tayong ways pa para magkaroon ng proper food on our table. Diba? Kung gusto mo talagang may makain kang matino, mag-alaga ka ng manok, yung 45 days. O magkaroon ka ng backyard gardening. Pag kailangan mo na ng ulam, ako napapanood nyo sa TikTok, okay, let's see what we can harvest. Pinapanood ko may garden sila sa backyard. Tapos meron silang nakukuha mga peppers, yung mga maliliit na cabbage. Tsaka meron silang, yung squash na maliliit. Tapos gagawin nilang, meron lang silang leftover. Meron silang mga chickens. Kuha lang sila ng itlog. Yan, may dinner na sila. Organic pa yun. Mas maganda pa nga yun, di ba? Na hindi mo, less expense yun sa family kapag meron kang, meron kang backyard gardening. O kayo, pwede kayo nun. Para magkaroon kayo ng pag nagawa kayo ng recipe, it's more on organic. Diba? Alam ko meron kayong cooking eh. Diba may cooking class kayo? So, pag nag-invent kayo ng mga recipe, ang mahanap ng mga tao ngayon, mga organic. Diba? O halimbawa, sa crop science, yung crop sciencing. O crop science. So in coordination sa inyo yan dahil kayo ay on the food industry, hospitality management industry, may pagkain dyan eh. Diba? And sa mga services na ipoprovide nyo is food. At kailangan meron kayong unique na, delicacy. At usong-uso talaga ngayon yung mga organic food, keto and everything. Dahil, we really, really invest on our health. Yan. So, I think we still belong here in the semi-peripheral. Hindi pa naman tayo yung talagang ginugutom at marami pa namang Pilipino ang may at yun nga, obvious naman maraming Pilipino ang may problema sa kalusugan. Kaya nga we venture into organic, nagpapapaya. Hindi mo naman tayo words na talagang obese, di ba? Pero like na parang nasa Amerika na mga 600 pounds, parang ganon, hindi na kaya ng weighing scale sa atin, or 600 pounds na, tama. Sa atin naman, yung our obesity is, pag nalaman medyo obese ka, kailangan mag-diet ka na. You go organic. Maganda nga pag organic ka. Sarili mo ng tanim or sarili mo ng, especially sa San Ildefonso and around the farms of San Rafael, maganda ang lupa. Kung meron nga kaming backyard, magtatanim ako ng mga panggulay-gulay para pag gusto ko ng gulay-gulay, di ba? Pitas ka lang, mga ganun ba? So in between, ito yung mga countries na could be a resource of materials or mga products from their environment and natural resources. Right? Na example sa exploitation, yung chocolates. Yan, si Hershey's Chocolate, si company, base yan sa United States. Bakit? Halimbawa, ang labor at ang cost ng material ni chocolate ni Hershey sa cocoa. Kung halimbawa, i-manufacture na yung production ng cocoa powder na gagamitin kay Hershey na galing kay Ghana, yung 1,000 kilograms ng raw cocoa ay $2, let's just say. Pag dinala na yan ni Hershey's chocolate, pag minanufacture na yan into Hershey's chocolate, may brand na Hershey's chocolate, ang benta nila doon sa isang bar could be na 100 grams, imagine, $2 yung 1,000 na raw. Pag binenta nila, could be, $1.50 or $2. Yung 100 grams. Hindi naman, syempre, hindi naman kasi yung 100 grams na yun, kung may sugar man yun, o di mas lalong, may milk pa siya, magkano lang yung ilang percent lang yung nakuha sa 1,000. So, sa 1,000, halimbawa, sa 1,000 kilograms, 1,000 kilograms, 1,000 grams, 1 kilogram, 1 kilogram of the $2 na galing kay Ghana. Pag kinonvert na yon into chocolate na Hershey, $2 din yung 100 grams. So sa 10, may kita na agad silang how much? 10 times. Doong raw material. Dahil naman hindi naman makakain yung raw material. Maraming maparaan na ang mga tao ngayon, may mga life hacks na. Diba? Bili sila nung raw material, tapos sila na mismo yung magbe-bake. Kaya hindi na sila bumibili ng chocolate na Hershey. Pero sabi nga nila, iba pa rin yung lasa ng Hershey's chocolate. Of the United States.
Created using Powtoon.
Yun ang kaya tinatawag na exploited. Alright? Ano pa? Ano pwede nating i-example for exploitation naman sa Philippines? Halimbawa, example na natin sa Philippines. Yung raw material na ginagamit, halimbawa, sa paggawa ng yung Rice Krispies. Yung masarap, yung sa Korea, Rice Krispies na Korean version. Diba? Halimbawa, galing sa Pilipinas yung sako ng bigas. Nabili halimbawa ng, ito na magkano sako ng bigas ngayon, 2,000 pesos. Magkano lang yung sa Korean dollars. Tapos, magmamanufacture sila ng Rice Krispies, ibebenta nila yung isang pack ng halimbawa ay 50 cents. Yung isang pack, galing, yung isang sako, makakagawa ka ng 100 packs. Diba? So, mas pa rin. Kumbaga, ang mangyayari, yung mga sources, they become, mas binabarat. Binabarat sila for a costing nung end product na ibebenta nung mas malaking country. Another example, OFW. Alright? OFW. Bakit ine-exploit? This is based on a personal, not so personal, pero personal experience. Nung araw, tanda. Ang father ko ay OFW. Ako'y high school, elementary. Ang bayad sa kanila is $1,000 per month. Pag kinonvert sa Philippines yun, 40K. Sa labor, nila yun? Ay 48, 50K. So, maalwal na buhay namin. Or makakaluwag-luwag na kami. Di pala maalwal. Nakakaluwag-luwag na kami. Samantalang, in original, pag nasa Amerika ka, magkano lang ang $1,000? Maliit yun. Kasi ang average labor for, a skilled man ay mas mataas. I'm not quite sure kung magkano ang minimum wage ng isang skilled man na nasa abroad. Pero it's not just 1,000 or 1,500. 500 allowance na nila papay. Araw. Yun, na-exploit. Kasi nakita naman na kaya namang, ang reason out, bastante naman sila sa food, provided na ng company yung food nila, yung shelter nila, may allowance pa sila. Kaya yung pera nila, pinapadala sa family, is just for the family. Kaya mapapansin na, halimbawa, ang average, I'm not quite sure, halimbawa, ang average ng isang minimum wager doon, worker doon, na citizen, halimbawa, ay $2,000 to $3,000. Malaki na yon, parang gano'n. $3,000 a month, parang gano'n. Maliit, yung binibigay na payad doon sa mga foreign, doon sa mga OFW, is half. Kasi nga, nakikita na sustainable naman na yung nandun yung pinapadala sa Philippines. Parang gano'n. Sinasabi lang, may reason out naman na bastante naman sila sa food, at saka sa shelter, meron silang bahay, may pa-housing. Kaya, hindi sila, exploited. Hindi equal yung binibigay dun sa mga OFW as compared dun sa mga locals na payment. Kasi nga, ibibigay, ang paggagamitan ng pera na kikitain ng local is igagastusin doon sa country. Mataas ang cost of living. Parang ganun. Ganun yung nangyayari. Yon, example. And then, let's just have the last one. Ito. Combination na to ng global, the combination of global system, the global or world system and the dependency theory.
Welcome to this C3 World Sociology screencast on World Systems Theory. World Systems Theory is a perspective associated with the work of Immanuel Wallerstein, and for our purposes, the easiest way of understanding this perspective is to see it as essentially a modified version of dependency theory. And both of these perspectives share a basis in Marxism, in a kind of Marxist critique of global capitalism. So let's just remind ourselves of dependency theory. So according to dependency theory, global inequality exists because resources flow from a poor periphery of countries into a rich core of wealthy states. And from this perspective, Andre Gunder Frank has argued that development and underdevelopment are the opposite faces of the same coin. In other words, what we call development is an uneven and hierarchical process which has seen economic power concentrated in an economic core of rich nations at the expense of the periphery of poorer countries. Now, world systems theory is very similar to dependency theory, but it also suggests that there is a third group of countries called the semi-periphery, which is intermediate between the rich core and the periphery of poorer nations. Now, world systems theory argues that the capitalist economic system is not merely a collection of independent countries engaged in diplomatic and economic relations, but must instead be understood as a single system. And within this system, the world has been carved up into three unequal economic zones, with the wealthier zones exploiting the poorer ones. And world systems theory calls these zones the core, the periphery, and the semi-periphery. And all countries in this capitalist world system fall into one of these three zones. So core countries represent the most highly developed economies in the modern world. And these were the first countries to develop fully fledged capitalist economies. And the core countries control world trade and are also centres of banking, finance, and research. And according to world systems theory, core countries make full use of the global economy, and they have the power to affect any other country within the system. In other words, core nations have a global reach. So core countries are the ones which get the most out of capitalism. So the core takes up all the surplus profits generated by the whole world, exploiting both periphery and semi-periphery countries. At the other extreme within this system, we have the periphery countries, and these comprise most of the developing world. So peripheral countries are those countries that are characterized by weak governments, under the control often of local elites who have been bought off or corrupted by the core nations. And periphery countries are poor, and their economies are mainly based on what economists call primary economic activity. And what this means is that they extract materials from the earth and have economies that are based around industries such as mining and agriculture. And their natural resources flow into the core and to some extent the semi-periphery along with profits. And the core in turn sells finished goods back to the periphery also at a profit. Now the semi-periphery countries occupy a space that is somewhere between the core and the periphery. So such countries may be newly industrializing countries such as India or Brazil, who aspire to core membership, or they may be former members of the core whose economic development has either stalled or declined. So semi-periphery countries tend to be industrialized, but with less sophistication of technology than is found in the core, and they don't tend to have the developed banking, insurance and research industries that we find in the core either. Now the core nations often outsource many manufacturing jobs to the semi-periphery in order to exploit their relatively low labour costs. And although this creates employment within the semi-periphery, most of the profits of this manufacturing industry still go back to the core. And in recent years, we've also seen some low-skilled service jobs, such as call centres, also being outsourced to the semi-periphery for similar reasons. So world systems theory says that the semi-periphery countries are exploited by the core, but in turn, they also try to exploit the countries within the periphery. And because they exploit as well as being exploited, they aren't fully on the same side as the periphery countries. And therefore, as there is no unity amongst the exploited nations within this system, it means that united action to change the system is in practice very difficult. Now, over time, it may be the case that some countries might drop out of the core, and some semi-periphery countries might experience upward mobility into the core, or indeed downward mobility into the periphery. And this is because the system is dynamic, and individual states can gain or lose their status over time. And according to this perspective, the reason for this is because capitalism doesn't respect national borders. Capital will move to wherever money is to be made, so the modern world system continually changes as capitalism searches for profit. Now, the dynamic nature of this system is illustrated in the case of Japan's remarkable ability to rise from the periphery of the global economy in the 1870s to probably second position after America by the 1980s. And also in recent years, we've seen the rapid rise of newly industrializing nations such as China and India. However, this kind of movement from the periphery to the core is normally very difficult, and the rise of one group of semi-periphery nations tends to be at the cost of another group. So the unequal structure of the world economy based on unequal exchange tends to remain stable and constant, even if certain nations move around within this system. Now, both dependency theory and world systems theory developed as a critique of modernization theory, and both perspectives argue that modernization theory is built on a faulty premise. In assuming that all countries can become more like the West, modernization theory was leaving out an important historical period called colonialism. So whilst rich countries such as the UK were once undeveloped, and then they got richer and became much more developed, they never went through a process where they were underdeveloped. In fact, a country like the UK experienced development because it was able to extract and exploit resources from its colonies. And this process of exploitation of poorer countries is referred to by dependency theory and world systems theory as a process of underdevelopment. And therefore, according to these perspectives, the development of the capitalist world system has generated wealth in some regions because it's been based on exploitation or underdevelopment in poorer countries whose economic surplus was expropriated by the richer countries. In other words, development and underdevelopment are two sides of the same coin. The fact that we've got these richer countries within the world economy at the moment has only been made possible through the way in which they systematically exploited and underdeveloped a much larger group of poorer countries. So whilst modernization theory and neoliberalism would see the problems of developing countries as mainly being internal, to do with things like corruption, economic mismanagement, and aspects of culture, both...
Just like we have discussed, di ba? Sa modernization and neoliberalism, it's more on, yung sinabi ni Lerner at saka ni Schramm, is more on the internal, yung management mismo corruption, or if there is misrepresentation of something that could affect the benefit of the many, yun yung sinasabi ng modernization. Meanwhile, ang problema for developing countries when it comes to dependency and world system, yun namang mga countries na nasa labas. Yung mga core countries at masyadong na dumidepende at nag-exploit sa mga smaller countries.
Both dependency theory and world systems theory place more emphasis on the external problems that poorer countries face. In other words, the way in which they've been exploited by other countries. So whereas modernization theory and neoliberalism would argue that international relations, and especially more trade, is good for the developing world, both dependency theory and world systems theory argue that in the current system, these things are bad and just involve exploitation. And that means that from this perspective, what is needed for poorer countries to develop is not more relations with the rich world, but less relations. They need to become de-linked, to use the jargon, from the global capitalist economy if they're really to achieve development. Where both perspectives are similar, though, is they both see development as fundamentally an economic process. And I think the other perspective that we've looked at during the world sociology course, the counter-industrial theories, would be critical of seeing development purely in economic terms and would be particularly anxious about the sustainability of economic development in either perspective. Welcome to...
So balikan natin itong part na to. This chart. Yan, pause na lang. So dito na may comparison na ng liberalism or neoliberalism at saka modernization. So let's go back. Sinasabi when it comes to sa point of view ng mga modern theorists, na yung international relation is good because you can parang they bring technology and industrialization inside a society, a developing society. Meanwhile, kay dependency theory, it's bad kasi again, the term is exploitative. Mayroong unfair na treatment, hindi siya equal. Still, kapag may international relation, pag nakialam ang ibang country sa isang developing country, ang nangyayari, mas nagbe-benefit pa rin yung malaking country kesa dun sa small country. Alright? So, ang development is possible if there is other relationship pagka sa modernization theory. Pagka naman daw sa dependency theory, hayaan munang mahinog yung country. Parang yung nangyari kay Japan. Hindi naman siya, sabi nga, hindi siya ganon, hindi madali yung naging growth ni Japan from periphery, from a poor country to a rich country. One of the richest countries. They really took time, di ba ang haba, 1800s to up to present, to become a developed country. Siguro ang Pilipinas, we will get there with the right leadership and with the right linkages. Di ba? And if it goes well, if modernization and the dependency world system meet halfway, siguro kaya or ma-equalize, saka lang magkakaroon ng ma-alleviate ang lifestyle at ang way of living ng mga Pilipino. And both, pareho din naman ang development nila, pareho industrialization, economic process. Kailangan mapalawak, mapalago ang ekonomiya para masabi na ikaw ay industrialized. I mean, ikaw ay modernized, industrialized, urbanized. It all goes down with the employment and the businesses. Kailangan may magandang palitan, both with dependency and theory and modernization. Yeah. Question so far?